without giving me the room link. So that was just a duplicate of me that was probably causing the problem. Too much Dakota.
But we all figured it out, and here we all are. And, you know, the stars have aligned to bring us all together. For anybody who is joining us in this discussion, first off, thank you to all the people who listened to the last one. At this point, we've got almost 2,000 views on that. So that being the case, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do a follow-up on that. So we got Dakota back again. Thank you, Dakota, for coming back.
Thank you for having me on, as always.
And we've got Adam C. Adam Other. He's the other Adam. I am Adam World, and we have Adam with us. He's the author of the book Civil War II, which is upcoming, if I'm not mistaken.
That's great.
And if anybody wants to find out about his work, you can find him at Civil War II _book on Twitter. And that's 2 with 2 I's. And then you can also find him on civilwar2.substack.com. Am I correct with that?
That's right.
All right.
And is that the same spelling, underscore double I?
It's Civil War II substack.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Substack.com, yeah. I'm just going to check that one.
Well, on the heels of our last discussion, once I posted that and started to see some of the responses coming in, Adam was one of the people who came out of the woodwork and had some nice things to say about Dakota and Dakota's ability to there you go, right on. That's awesome. To process the information and to talk about it. And he really pointed that out and was kind of gushing about it. And I took a look at his page just out of curiosity, and I saw, okay, this guy's writing a book here. This is interesting. Civil War II, huh? That's interesting. You know, that's kind of in line to some degree with what we were just discussing last time. So just kind of looking a little bit more into it, and the more that I did, the more that I felt that we were pretty aligned on certain things. And I felt like it would be a good opportunity to bring the three of us together. Adam has been expressing to me, Dakota, how much he has looked forward to talking to you. So
I can only disappoint from here. So
yeah.
all of my burst of insight took 24 odd years of cognition to come to. So check in another quarter century, when I've had time to think things over to that degree again, and I'll say something else smart. But thank you.
Well, we're gonna talk about your book, Adam. So Civil War II, we're gonna use that as sort of our springboard into the conversation here. And when I saw that Civil War II, that to me echoed how I've been feeling, and I know other people have felt the same way, just about the tensions that are happening right now. It feels like, if it hasn't popped already, and it kind of has in various regards, it feels like it's going to. And obviously, the January 6th insurrection really brought to light the potential for something worse to happen. And
in some ways it shows kind of the mechanism by which it will happen is indirect leading of a mob and the creation of an unstable environment that allows paramilitary groups room and cover to act where they would have been mostly dormant before. As Oath Keepers would not have breached the doors without the cover of a mob, in my opinion.
Adam, what do you think?
Right, so just to give a quick sort of summary of where the book's coming from, it's Civil War II from insurrection to insurgency. That's the subtitle. And the idea is that we, as you were suggesting, We're currently under, there's a sort of a cold civil war right now. There's essentially 2 or 3 components to it. There's a political, legal, and paramilitary elements. The paramilitary elements you referred to, Dakota, particularly on 1.6, which we'll come back to, because I've got some questions I'd like to dig a little bit deeper on your prior interviews on about some of those details and some broader issues from that. Politically now we see that the fake slates were created so that the vice president, when he goes into the chamber, could say there's some dispute, which of course there wasn't. It was all completely fake and created. But the fact that they went to that trouble shows that it's a lot more premeditated than we previously thought. It wasn't just a bunch of people getting angry and storming a building. They deliberately held that meeting on that day, at that time, at that location, in order to put pressure on Pence and the Congress. There is a deliberate program. This wasn't just some accident, okay? But what we're seeing now in the bigger picture is that with the fake slate piece, which is added on to all sorts of the other things that we already know about that was going on. For example, between Election Day and Inauguration Day, or even Election Day in January 6th, Trump decapitates the Department of Justice. He decapitates the Department of Defense. He tries to decapitate the intelligence community, doesn't quite get success with that. And by decapitate, I mean force out the certified leadership, certified by the Senate leadership, to all of the, and this is his play, that he has all these flunkies that are not properly duly selected by the Senate.
They're not confirmed. They're all acting.
That
appointed.
Was the word I was looking
and
for.
Multiple times through his administration, he would just keep reappointing someone as an acting authority in whatever cabinet position or Department of Defense position he picked, to keep them from going up before the Senate to be confirmed or vetoed. So he was just able to to exploit the technical loophole and keep people personally loyal to him in those positions on a circulating temporary basis.
Right. And so what we see is, particularly with the Department of Justice, Barr goes right up to the limit, and then he turns around and says, I see no evidence of a faulty election. 2 weeks later, he's gone. Whether he was fired or he left, it's now unclear. There's some argument both ways. Trump immediately goes to the next leadership of the Department of Justice, Acting Attorney General Rosen and the Deputy Acting Attorney General. But what he'd done in the meantime, there was some member of Congress from Pennsylvania who had a connection to Eastman. John Eastman was some mid-level guy in the Department of Justice. And Trump and Eastman had this conversation that Eastman would draft up this letter, send it out to the contested states, which are also the ones with the fake slates, by the way, justifying this whole process and saying that the Department of Justice is now concerned about the outcome of the election in those states, which it wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. Barr had done an investigation with the FBI and it had come up empty. And imagine though, if Barr had not, Barr was Trump's personal attorney virtually the whole time. Imagine if he hadn't been honest at the last step. So Trump calls Rosen. He basically tells him, just say it was bent. Say the election was stolen and let me and the Republican congressman do the rest. Me and the Republican congressman thing was interesting at the time. And what he was referring to was this whole fake slate process from the contested states. And incredibly, Mike Pence held out at the very end. And everybody keeps saying, the American democracy was fine, it weathered the storm. But what you're really talking about is 2 or 3 individuals like Rosen, like Pence, at critical moments who make a decision that let the situation hold. Now, since then, this was like a dry run. And it was, like a war game almost. We're talking about the big picture strategic stuff. We're not talking about the operations, the paramilitary operations yet. And they've learned from them. Somebody described it as Trump being a burglar, going in a hotel, going from door to door, just trying everything to see what he could pull off. Mm-hmm. And I think that's quite a good way of describing it, frankly, because some of the things he did were in tension with some of the other things he did. He was just trying everything to try and hold on. But then, and this is the paramilitary side kicks in, so we will talk about January 6th, but there are other paramilitary activities going on. If you have a look at the stress and pressure that were put on local election organizations around the country, people are leaving in droves. There's been some very good documentaries on this. I remember there was one where I think it was Frontline, where they interview a bunch of people in Georgia, election officials in Georgia, and there's one number of resigning. And there's one guy, he says he's going to stick it out because if he doesn't, who is? And then they go back to see him a couple of months later, and there's so many threats and so much hate mail. And in fact, in many cases, armed people turning up either at their homes or their workplaces or the homes of their families to pressure them that they just walk away. And this is so outrageous because these people are salt of the earth Americans. Some of them are just volunteers who their activities as election officials has never been questioned before. And now suddenly, oh, this is all fake and all these problems with the election. It's so obviously rubbish. But there's only so much that people will put up with, especially when their lives are being threatened. So those activities are taking place, and in many ways it strikes me that Steve Bannon is kind of the genius behind all of this, because he has he's self-described Leninist, and he's conducting really a Viet Cong village shadow government campaign, which is if you control the situation in each village, that will filter. The government can't cover everywhere all the time. So that will feed up through the system to enable them to steal the next election. So that's kind of the approach that they're taking. Now, on the paramilitary side, that's where I have some questions about the Oath Keepers and all of that aspect of it, because there's obviously been a tremendous amount of reporting on it, but some of it's not entirely clear to me. So I'd like to ask some questions about that. But essentially what the book does is it outlines how all of this has come to pass, but it puts it in a historical and cultural context where you see the parallels between this period and the 1920s and 30s in Europe is incredibly strong. You have incredibly dislocating major wars that have gone on that have dislocated both the international system and domestic political worlds. You've had a pandemic, you've had mass death, you've had economic crises, not just the one connected to the pandemic, but also, the 2008 one. You've got all of these crises that have been taking place in the United States really since bin Laden attacked us. And one of the things that struck me about one of your prior interviews was how you tied in, particularly you were discussing the Kurds and the connection between how we treated the Kurds and how that impacted veterans and how that impacted the extremist movements. In all of these historical cases, veterans, both in the United States and in Europe and in Australia, were all promised things, and then they were all denied these things that they were promised. They go through these terrible wars and they come home and they're treated just as bad, if not worse, particularly with reference to the things that they were promised before. So there's an interesting veterans angle to that. And equally, you mentioned the Smedley Butler fascist coup attempt, which I was amazed that you knew about. So there's
grew up with a copy of War is a Racket on my bookshelf. It's one of the things that was really a quality piece of education that filtered to me through all the noise. Didn't mean to talk over you there, though.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to, just sort of give the whole sort of outline of where the book's at, and then we can do the Q&A. But that's essentially it. Well, no, there's
For anybody who's not familiar with it, can you just really quick explain who Smedley Butler is?
Dakota, why don't you?
All right. Smedley Butler was one of the, especially at the time, most famous in pop culture war heroes in American history, and huge popularity and enshrined in U.S. military history. And he was approached, or so he testified to Congress, by a cabal of industrialists and retired generals and admirals who were unhappy with left-wing politics in the United States, and they wanted a fascist overthrow because fascism was still fashionable. This is pre-World War II, so we had not... The best thing Hitler ever did was get anti-Semitism and fascism wrapped up in rabid wartime propaganda to inoculate us against it a little bit culturally. But they were popular ideas worldwide. There were many American fascists, and these business leaders were like, we have to save America from socialism. There's a socialist plot to take over the country. The only thing we can do is overthrow the government to save it, which is going to sound pretty familiar to a lot of people right now. But their mistake was they approached someone with integrity to ask them to be their frontman and their figurehead for the populist side of their overthrow. And the first thing he did was go to Congress and testify and name names, and there was no other evidence. So it nothing ever went to trial. But the exposure and especially the credibility of this coming from Smedley Butler ripped the lid off of their attempts, and they were, I'd say, temporarily defeated, but the same current that created that situation has continued through today. And now all the World War II veterans are old, and there's not really any World War II veterans in public office or positions of military authority anymore. So the people that have direct experience with what fascism leads to are no longer holding power. You have people that grew up with the wartime propaganda glorified version of our struggle against fascism, and then the Cold War propaganda especially, holding positions of power, who are much more vulnerable to either assuming business as usual or absorbing fascist propaganda. And disaffected youth in particular are very vulnerable to fascist and hyper-nationalist myths. So we're in a dangerous spot, on top of which I think, and this is just conjecture, I don't have direct evidence except for like what we went into is the strange pardoning of Blackwater contractors and the high placement of Eric Prince's sister, is that I think Business Plot 2 is smarter and picked a much more malleable frontman. Instead of picking a real war hero who might have integrity or spine and then not agree with their ideas, they pick someone who's only a hypothetical war hero in his own mind, our Lord and Savior Donald J. Trump.
The chosen one.
Yeah, who would have gotten a ton of medals in Vietnam if it weren't for those darn bone spurs, or so he says.
Yeah.
There are some other parallels to that too. And just to give a little bit more of that historical piece, the Russian Revolution was the big thing happening in the world. We're going back to the interwar years and the Smedley Butler rise. And there wasn't you had democracy. But aside from democracy, there really wasn't an alternative. And that's how fascism comes about. It starts in Italy. And Mussolini was kind of the progenitor of fascism. And there's a very interesting question, to what extent fascism is any different to communism. And I go into that in quite some detail in the book.
Especially Leninist thought in particular, and Maoist communism and the authoritarianism that springs from that. I think really the only attempt at a communist state that didn't end in authoritarianism was the territory controlled by the Ukrainian Black Army during the Russian Civil War, and then the Soviets crushed them the second they didn't need them anymore.
Yeah, that the trend line from the theory of a political change to the practice of the political, the thing that actually happens, are two totally different roads, right? And the revolution gets hijacked. So it's supposed to be the revolution of the proletariat taking control of the means of production. Well, it turns out that the Russians swapped a czar for a committee of peasant czars. That's essentially what happened. The whole thing was hijacked. Then you end up with Lenin, then later Stalin as the pure dictator, just like, you know, on the other, the competing concept, Mussolini, and then later Hitler. But the point I was trying to get at is to your point, which was the fascism was incredibly popular around the world. There were fascist movements, not just in Germany, and street battles in Britain, in Australia, and in the United States. The German-American Bund had 30,000 members. They had the big famous rally in 1941, prior to, obviously, the attack on Pearl Harbor. But you had other very famous American fascist-leaning people, Henry Ford, Charles Lindbergh, and a bunch of others that tie into that whole sort of movement that was going on. So a lot of people don't really know that side of the story, and that there was a lot of that kind of ferment taking place then. But looking at it from a historical perspective, one of the things, so what's different between now and then, right? And the critical issue is what a historian would call time-space compression, which is everything, our world is much faster. It's a degree of acceleration that they couldn't possibly imagine. So we have the benefit of hindsight, that we can see that the history is rhyming, to quote Twain. It doesn't repeat, it rhymes. But we have the advantage of being able to see it with some hindsight and see that the same things are happening. But we've got to make these decisions really much faster than they had to make it in the day. And that presents us with a whole new set of challenges. And then I want to touch on how the internet, in particular social media, amplifies and radicalizes things even more so. But just one final point on the Smedley Butler thing. There was a congressional committee and Butler testifies, and the lid's blown off the whole thing, right? This is enormously embarrassing for everybody concerned. He names names, and suddenly the committee kind of just goes silent and virtually disappears. There was no legal action. They stopped after he brought a journalist with him to the original meetings of with the Pushts, promoters of the Pusht, and so he had to back up people to provide evidence. And as soon as they provided their evidence, the whole thing was quashed. And it reminds me and so they didn't even get the little guys. So this time around, they're getting the little guys, the cosplay army soldier, oath keeper people on I was going to say 9/11. It's kind of how I see it. It's 1/6. They're getting those guys, but the committee, there's enough evidence out there to go and get the middle player. Stuart Rhodes is not a middle player here. He's a toy soldier, right?
He really thinks he's a middle player, which makes him very easy to manipulate, and very motivated by fear, which makes you short-sighted. But yes, I think there's a degree of fear of persecution if Republicans take the White House again that is stalling a lot of these investigations. Like, what's going to happen to you if you're the one who prosecuted Trump and then all of a sudden the guard changes?
Newt Gingrich just came out and threatened the committee. He just outright said, we're going to come and get you for doing this to us. Gates, and this comes back to the internet piece, how are people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and Bobbitt and all of these people who are clearly fringe players, right? They would never be in any position of, they'd be kind of like the embarrassing member of Congress that you'd put in the back room and never talk to in the old days. But today, and this ties into the creation of the mass movement, right? That it's down to algorithmic selection. It's like natural selection, but the algorithms that are run by Facebook and Google in particular, for commercial purposes, they need you to keep staying on the website. So the way they do that is by exciting you. So, you know,
nothing keeps people more glued to a screen than fear and outrage and anger. It's been Fox News' mainstay for a million years. It's the mainstay of some programs on CNN and many smaller news channels. And these algorithms have selected for that, and further supporting evidence of that, they select for people that are vulnerable to mental illness. Instagram got popped for automatically directing teenage girls with body image issues to eating disorder fetish pages because it would mentally ill people hyperfixating on things that are bad for them is engagement, it's ad revenue, and the process is either happening with their sign-off or happening completely automated without oversight. And there is no check on making sure that they're not creating something dangerous with this algorithm. It is nothing but a profit machine, and they wash their hands of any social knock-on effects.
That's exactly it. And that's why commercially it might have one application, but when you apply it in the political realm, what keeps people's attention in the political domain, as you said, it's outrage, right? It's the more you can wind people up and get them excited. So in the 2016 election, anybody looking up a political question was recommended on YouTube, was recommended to Alex Jones's InfoWars site 16 billion times. That's not because he was paying for ad revenue. It's because he's a completely deranged lunatic entertainer who got people to stay on the site. So it was the extension of exactly that system. And this is what's created what I call polytainment. It's the extension of infotainment to the political world. So it used to be, if you're I worked for a member of Congress for a time. It used to be in the political world that you'd have a successful track record of representing your constituents, bringing money home, getting bridges built, all of those things that they're trying to do right now. That's all gone. The thing now is polytainment. It's to own the other side by saying the most ludicrous and outrageous thing, which is why the Marjorie Taylor Greene wing, the QAnon wing, as I call that lot, will be in charge. And Matt Gaetz came out with this video the other day saying, we're coming, and we're like the Newt Gingrich piece. He comes out and says, we're going to be in charge, we're going to be calling the shots, and all hell's going to break loose. And people are, oh no, you know, McCarthy's going to be the leader and so on. No, he's not. MacArthur had to
not in practice.
Not in practice and not in theory. He had to beg Marjorie Taylor Greene for his survival, basically, already. So they're going to eat him for lunch. And the whole political world doesn't understand that when she screwed up and was kicked off committee, the best thing that could have ever happened to her, because she doesn't have to do any actual work, and she's got all the time in the world to just generate, you know, tweets.
Buzz.
Right. So all of these factors coming together, coming to a head at one time, is what's different from the last time around, and what has put us into it. And they've got 60% of Republicans to 80% of Republicans, but in that frame, and a significant proportion of independents and even some Democrats don't believe that Biden was legitimately elected. And a good proportion, I think it's like 35% of Americans believe violence is justified to right this terrible wrong. So that's a recipe for an absolute nightmare. And we're hurtling towards that outcome. So that's the argument of the book in a nutshell. It looks at the historical background. It looks at how social media technology has really amplified and extended the thing and changed the political culture in very negative ways. That's enabled these people and has really taken what was fringe and made the fringe the mainstream. Because if you mentioned this in one of your things before, I thought it was I was quite interested that you noticed this, that if you're a fringe person, how do you find another fringe person without the internet? You'd have to, it would be embarrassing to try and talk to try and find others like yourself, right? Whereas now you can go and find every freak under the sun, and when you're in these little chat rooms,
it
or
normalizes.
whatever their systems are, it validates the viewpoint, and it makes people think that it's a legitimate, widespread belief when it's not. And that's one of the biggest problems, I think, politically, that's happening to the US. So, yeah, we're in a very serious situation, actually, I think.
Yes, and it's compounded by the fact that we have people who are in league with or complicit with this attempt to take over the country, and then because narcissists and users always project, they're going to rig every subsequent election to make sure that they have a permanent hold on power, and they can create accusations of voter fraud going the other way to create noise to cover it. And everyone that should be opposing them just wants to go back to business as usual and pretend that we're back in 2008. Right. But we are not. We are in a very different, very dangerous position. I don't think the White House understands that. I don't think the majority of Democrats in the Senate or Congress, or even like moderate Republicans, understand how vastly different the situation is, and that we cannot rug sweep this. And we are already 100% in conflict, but their inaction is what created this problem in the first place. You don't see mass populist violent movements in a society that is running well and where people have hope for the future. What's happening now is a direct result of the fact that our government is basically breaking down and doesn't do anything anymore. Republicans who want to pass laws banning, just today, Texas is piling up copies of 1984 from school libraries to burn them in accordance with state law. That's not a joke. It's happening right now. I'm almost certain they're getting rid of Fahrenheit 451. Like, the photos and videos are horrifying. Is under this banner of banning CRT to protect your children from anti-white, racist, communist programming, they're literally burning copies of 1984. If that isn't the clearest possible danger signal, I don't know what is. But everyone in a position to try to stop this in power currently is they're burying their heads in the sand, and they want to pretend that everything is fine and they can keep playing this game to their advantage, or that at some point the crazy wing of Congress will be seduced by the corruption in the system and everything will be smoothed over. But if the crazy people in Congress get suckered in and start acting like regular old guard Republicans and moderate themselves, they're going to be replaced, because people want crazy now, because their options are crazy or more of the same. And more of the same has been failing for decades to do anything at all, except not even fight wars, but just further war, almost for its own sake, is the common American public perception.
Sure.
So now in this position, so a question to you before we just go over to you asking me questions about Oath Keepers is, would you characterize this as a fourth generation conflict? Because there was that was a really common topic in Oath Keepers, and that's the opinion of, or at least was when I was last in contact with them, Oath Keepers people, is because of their pervasive belief in a vast left-wing conspiracy against them on behalf of the New World Order, is their belief is that they're already in. Because I would like some of that highly organized conspiratorial leftism or moderatism right now, because I don't think it's there. I think the conspiracy is the right wing, personally, but they see it as they're already in a fourth generation warfare conflict, and the majority of the American people are just unaware of it.
Well, I think you just answered your own question, because on the one hand, prior to that, you were saying how nobody in the White House and even in Congress understands what's going on. So if that's the case, how could they be mounting a fourth generation warfare, right? Beyond that, the idea of a fourth generation warfare, that's a whole discussion in its own right. It's not talked about that much now. It's more hybrid warfare and so on. And that is what's happening. And it's happening from really multiple vectors. It's happening domestically, and that's a lot of the things we've talked about. What we haven't talked about, though, is the international element, which is Russian intelligence manipulation of exactly the same system. So how did the world find out about the sort of the algorithmic outrage machine? We first found out about it through Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica had a connection through a cutout, Lukoil, through to the GRU, who used it. All of these techniques are old school Russian propaganda techniques. But what they didn't have was the knowledge of how to use social media to, allied with their traditional methods, to then achieve their objectives. They get that through Cambridge Analytica. As simultaneously does Bannon get the same thing. So there's a very interesting case in the Cambridge Analytica situation where as far back as 2014...
There's a highly suspicious coincidence.
Right. That they're testing phrases like build the wall and drain the swamp. This is in 2014. And the whole Cambridge Analytica story it's a fascinating one. In short, the unique aspect of it was that they, for a variety of ways, they're able to get 50 million accounts or even more than that accounts on Facebook, which turned Facebook basically into the psychometric testing lab. It turned Facebook into one huge psychological testing lab where they could work out the best ways of mounting psychological warfare and then apply it to the American electorate, which they did through Cambridge Analytica and Bannon, but the Russians also did it simultaneously. So they both learned at the same time and then applied. Then if you have a look at all of the connections between, you know, the Mueller report goes into a lot of the detail of the connections between the Russians and Trump, but there are much deeper connections that are covered in some areas, but not really very well covered. Putin operates, Russian intelligence operates with the Russian mob as kind of one of their proxy forces in the world. The Russian mob had been working Trump as far back as '84. There's a mobster who goes into Trump Tower and he buys 3 or 4 units at once. Of course, Trump, you know, he likes $1. So he actually attends the closing of this deal and he meets this guy. And this guy arrived in America as an immigrant, as a taxi driver, and now he's buying 4 or 5 Trump properties in the 80s, mind you. From then on, he ends up all these, you know, fool me once, fool me twice, but when you fool me 32 times, there's a bit of a pattern. And there's so many Russian mobsters who keep filtering through Trump Tower. Now, you remember he accused Obama of spying on him. Well, the FBI had, in fact, been conducting an intelligence operation, but it was focused on the studio or the apartment, whatever you want to call it, immediately under his. It had been going on for years. There was a Russian mob operation going out of the exact same building, one floor immediately beneath Trump.
It's a funny coincidence.
Yeah, so there's also, I mean, there's so much stuff. And that's one of the things about all of this. There's just so much stuff to pull it all together. It takes a lot of work, trust me. But you've got so you've got the domestic hand on this, and then the international hand on this, that all, whether they're coordinated or not, are going to the same outcome. And I believe he won 2016 legitimately. Because I think you were touching on this too, and you have in prior discussions. The people, the average citizen has, you know, if you look at wages have been stagnant or dropping since the 80s. The first time all of this really hit me was I was a war college professor for over a decade, and I remember once in 2008 when the financial crisis was really hitting, and I asked my guys and girls. When I say guys, I mean it gender.
Guys is
Your people.
basically a gender neutral term in 2022 now.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't want to get into trouble, so I'm just
My dudes.
being clear.
Guy and dude and fellows, those are all gender neutral now. Just go with it.
I asked my gang, hands up who thought that their children they would not do as well as their own parents, and that their children would not do as well as them. And it was a universal hands up. And at that point, I thought, okay, we've got a really big problem on our hands, because these guys are field grade officers. The ones that actually go to school in residence are the pick of the crop. They're the top 5% of the Marine Corps. And so we've got to really, that was, for me, it was a signal moment. It was one of the precursors to this research project that I've ended up in this book. Not directly, but, these little things you pick up along the way, the canaries in the coal mine. And what's interesting about it, I think, is that the Bushes and the Clintons, as representative of the old Republican and Democratic parties, were just not answering the question for the average person anymore. And here comes this sort of brash, obnoxious person who says, I will fix it for you. I know how this all operates. I know the shell game they're playing. Trust me, I'm going to go and shake up the system. And I think a lot of people just went, you know what? I'm going to give the bird to the system and pick this guy.
That's exactly how I viewed it.
Yeah.
That is exactly what got me. I was incredibly suspicious of Trump. I didn't like how he carried himself or any of the things he said. I didn't get the appeal. And then it was the wellspring filtered to me through the online communities I was in. It was the wellspring of popular anger at how broken our system had become. And he was making very specific promises, like, I've taken advantage of tax loopholes as a billionaire my entire life. I'll know how to close them. I've been on the other side. I've been a scuzzy, shady real estate developer. I've got all these high-level connections. I know exactly how the game is played. And I can fix these problems because I know all the vulnerabilities in the system that are being exploited. Was a part of his campaign directed at people like me who care about that kind of thing. And what we ended up getting was like a low-level stealing quarters out of parking meters thug answering to incredibly insidious people who were propping him up in the brains department.
Yeah, and in fact, he just created bigger tax loopholes for his buddies on Wall Street.
And the tax breaks for us are scheduled to detonate in 2022. That's a bomb that's set up to go off in a Democrat administration if it's not re-upped.
So you said previously you were 100% QAnon. You were 100%...
Not QAnon, Pizzagate. I was really wrapped up in that before QAnon really started to gain steam. Like, somebody was asking me about one particular Oath Keepers operation where Oath Keepers went to Arizona and got entangled with a local militia guy nicknamed Screwy Louie, who was like hot on the trail of human trafficking across the Mexican border and like implied satanic child sacrifice, and then that morphed into Oath Keepers trying to do a border security operation with like border recon militias. But I was totally unaware of the conspiracy side of it. I was just like, this guy is nuts. Why are you hanging out with him? I was on 4chan while the initial selection for the QAnon myth was taking place. I was there when the Q drops were first starting, but it looked like nonsense to me. And there were a million other Anons, which either this was a wellspring for popular creative writing, or someone was deliberately testing different myths to see which one would take root for their pet conspiracy theory. And it had not yet fully absorbed Pizzagate into the wider QAnon Borg. Like, there was Secret Service Anon, FBI Anon, and NSA Anon, and for some reason it was the nuclear weapons schematics clearance guy. They got all the play because it was the weird Socratic method of asking vague questions that could be interpreted to fit any kind of event you wanted. That was, and no specifics, that was the magic touch. But yeah, I was fully wrapped up in all of that before all those things were suctioned up into QAnon. I thought that it made perfect internal sense. I completely disregarded the Mueller report. I completely disregarded the Russia connection. I thought it was ridiculous propaganda. I thought Mitt Romney was trying to get us involved in Cold War II for his own gain, or because he was just stuck in the mindset. I just dismissed all of it out of hand because I was mired in people who thought Trump was going to save us all. And you know what? It felt really good to not be concerned about the apocalypse and Homeland Security coming to burn our house down every 3 months, like I had grown up, I'd grown up mired in that. It felt amazing to think, even if Trump sucks as a president, we personally are probably not going to be targets. And because I really thought the government was out to get us still at that point, we defined as the right-wing constitutionalist militia movement, libertarian movement, and the remnants of the Ron Paul supporters. And it was like, it's going to be good to not be targeted, and that feeling of relief from being afraid of the end of the world is what psychologically smoothed me into the Trump fold. And
like, do you mean that it was sort of almost like you felt safe? Is that the idea, that you felt safe?
Yeah, I felt like I was
that if the world was going to come to an end, that these were the guys who were going to be there to clean up the mess, kind of a thing.
Or at least like government agencies weren't going to be targeting us because of Oath Keepers, or there wasn't going to be like a massive terrorist attack and then a Democrat president incurring martial law, or just like, honestly, looking back, like the entire belief system I was raised in is so ridiculous. I can't pinpoint why exactly I believed in large parts of it, but that's the mindset I was in. I think that was a mindset of a lot of conspiracy theorists, is they thought even if they didn't like Trump, they were going to hold their nose to stave off the collapse for a few more years so they could help to get ready. And that's what drew me in. And like the Epstein case and prior belief in like the child sacrifice rumors surrounding Bohemian Grove primed me to be a complete believer in Pizzagate. And that is what fully wrapped me up in the Trump mythos. And then November 9th, he's got a spokesperson on the air saying that, like, the Trump White House was going to, like, build some bridges back with the Clintons and their wing of the Democratic Party. Maybe, I think the quote was, maybe he can help her heal, and then refused to specify what that meant. Next day, it's like, really, what happened to lock her up? Because very technically, there was a prosecutable crime in the emails thing. Now, there are very technically many, many, many more prosecutable crimes committed by Donald Trump before, during, and after his time as president. But that is a thing they could have feasibly gone for. There would have been a slam dunk if you've got the entire Department of Justice on your side. And just, they didn't. And didn't touch the child sacrifice thing. And also, if that was fake and there was no evidence of it, you don't even have to go there. But they didn't.
Why do you... Where do you think the child sacrifice? I've got a theory on this, but I'm interested in your idea of it. Where did that come from, and why is it so appealing to so many people?
Well, it's been appealing to people since it was used as a slur against Christians in ancient Rome. It's a archetype of human psychology. It started out with the conspiracy theory among the Roman elite that early Christians were drinking the blood of children in the communion, and then that was turned into anti-Semitism. That's where the blood libel slur that the blood of Gentile children is consumed during Passover. And it's a very easy, highly contagious myth to use. And that's why it was always an undercurrent in the conspiracy theorist circles that was involved in Bohemian Grove, and conspiracy theories about the Bilderbergs and the Council on Foreign Relations going way back. And then the Epstein connection with Bill Clinton is just fuel on the fire.
And also with Trump, though.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, is Trump's connection to Epstein was aggressively rug swept, because there was confirmation that Bill Clinton had dodged his Secret Service detail to go on a charity trip with Epstein on one of his private planes. And there was not yet, like, it was known that Epstein frequented Trump's properties, and he was later banned. But the depth to which they were entangled was aggressively buried. If I'd been at all exposed to the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell was first named as a recruiter for Epstein's underage sex parties in a lawsuit that alleges that Trump brutally raped a 14-year-old girl, that would have raised my eyebrows, even as mired in that thinking as I was, because, you know, that part of that completely panned out in the Epstein case, but that information was totally buried under noise and aggressively attacked by what I now believe were a motivated core of shills.
Do you think that Trump was responsible for Epstein's death? I'm inclined. Just my gut feeling says that he was, but I can't say for sure. But it just, to me, seems like kind of the reality winner thing as well. It just seems like there was a few things going on early on in his administration that were really, leading to impeachment and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, there's just that to me was one of those things where it seems obvious to me, and I could be wrong about this, but it seems obvious to me that Trump had connections to Epstein and that they were buddies. And, there's plenty of photographic evidence to support that. And that Epstein was in the perfect place right there to basically dish on Trump. And that's why he got killed.
Well, here's the thing is Epstein had a lot of photos of a lot of people.
Sure.
There's almost as many pictures of Epstein with Bill Gates and Prince Andrews as there are with Donald Trump. So if I
think that if I'll just say this really quick, I really feel like it's Epstein reveals this sort of larger reality. Like, I think a lot of people already knew that it existed, but it does pull back the corner to some degree and kind of shows like this is what's happening in the elite sectors. You know what I mean? Like, this is how they spend their time. This is how they party, and there's a lot of prostitution involved and a lot of, who knows, right? This is, to me, is what is so twisted about the QAnon stuff, because it kind of twists the reality, I think. Yeah.
It's complete projection, because QAnon, after the account was probably sold, was hosted entirely on a split off of 4chan that existed only because Original Flavor 4chan started banning underage depictions of sexual depictions of underage girls in artwork, where they've been tolerating that before because it's a legal gray area. And 4chan basically started as an outgrowth of nerds who were obsessed with Japanese culture. It's a copy one-to-one of a Japanese image board, and Japan has a problem with that.
Is 4chan still functioning?
Oh, 4chan's still around. It absolutely is. It's still huge. And in fact, I just
always hear it's so mired in controversy that I'm like, is this still around? I haven't heard much of it.
Well, the politics and science and technology boards have been completely taken over by operatives from Stormfront. Like, it's gone. All you can do is purge those boards and just light them on fire and get it over with. The random board is, I go there for basically the role-playing games board. And that's where I hung out for my entire teenage, is the role-playing and board games section. But like the science and technology section, a lot of the outdoor section, the gun nut section, the gun nut section less so. There's been a concerted effort by white supremacists to take over all those spaces and absorb lonely young men and disaffected people with internet connections to white supremacist and white nationalist propaganda. And that was one of the politics board of 4chan was the original incubation of QAnon, and then went to 8chan later, exclusively when I believe the handle was sold.
Did Gamergate explode on 4chan?
Oh, absolutely. 4chan was, I think, the main driver of the part of Gamergate that got nasty, the death threats part.
I
was
asked that
4chan.
because are you familiar with Bannon's fascination with that in the?
Actually, no, I didn't know Bannon. I wouldn't have thought that Bannon would have cared about Gamergate whatsoever.
Oh, quite the contrary.
Really quick, Gamergate is the whole thing that happened with GameStop.
No, this is much older. This is was it Anita Sarkeesian? Was that the person who was at the center of all that?
I don't know the name of the person, but
If I'm probably thinking of the wrong feminist front, like modern feminist front woman, but there was a controversy with a major games journalism magazine where they did not disclose that an editor who wrote a review of a video game was in a personal relationship with one of the creators of the game. And people got kind of mad about that, but the game was from a feminist, like modern fourth wave feminist perspective, and was supposed to be like a deconstruction of patriarchal society or a commentary on it. And a bunch of people thought it just wasn't a very good game in itself, leaving aside the art form, and it turned into this huge thing where it turned into it. And parts I find fault in is people being very quick to say that like all white men who play video games are inherently misogynistic, which that did not help, but it was very quickly latched onto by troglodytes who very much fit the stereotype, who turned it into gamers unite against feminism ruining our society movement. Okay. And I think probably some people saw that as a prototype for rallying disaffected young men in online communities and directing them at someone to harass.
100%. That's what
it was naturally occurring, but it created a pattern that could be exploited.
It
showed the way.
That's exactly what the Bannon project was. So when he discovered what Cambridge Analytica could do, in other words, how it could manipulate psychologically vulnerable people, right? His immediate reaction was, this is the perfect vehicle. I want to apply this technology to the people involved in Gamergate or those communities, which then transfers into the incel movement as well, right? There's a connection.
Sure.
And his whole project.
The layers are coming out right now. Yeah.
But this is why, you know, he doesn't physically present well. He looks shabby. His radio program, he says ridiculous things.
He's the perfect spokesperson for the incels, then.
But the point is that he's really a wolf in sheep's clothing, because he looks like and sounds like an idiot, but in fact he's enormously intelligent with a very particular political program. And his original idea came through Gamergate, and when he saw what Cambridge Analytica could do, he's like, let's unleash this into this community and rile up the angry young men, because the angry young men are the warriors in society, right? And yet they're the fake warriors. This is the other thing too. It's almost like shaming them for being these dweebs in their basements. You know, it's just like a double play almost. It's a fascinating thing.
The use of shame as a control lever has been greatly exploited by the actors behind the right-wing fringe. It's one of their favorite weapons. It's used to completely discredit everyone who disagrees with them. It was used very heavily during the 2016 campaign, that any man who would vote for Hillary Clinton is a latte sipping, plaid wearing metrosexual hipster.
Yeah. Snowflakes.
Very particular. Snowflakes.
And yet their messiah is the most shameless person on earth.
Yeah. Yep. The irony.
Exactly. And that's where, like, I really feel like, in a way, being currently mired in one extremist group and then seeing firsthand, like with Stuart Rhodes, I was seeing the production, and then I was seeing the man behind the curtain running all of the wheels and levers. So I was still in a place to be vulnerable to that kind of messaging and got sucked up into Pizzagate because it was more plausible than a lot of conspiracy theories I'd been surrounded by. But I had enough experience with conspiracy theories to disregard QAnon. Like plausible, when I say plausible, I mean on a continuum with Operation Jade Helm going live and decapitating the militia movement, or Russian tanks on the Mexican border waiting to cross over and invade Texas because they've been assembled in secret in shipping containers and shit like that. And so my experience with conspiracy theories, I disregarded QAnon early, and I just mostly ignored it. But while I was vulnerable and got sucked in initially, it was, like I said before, seeing the parallels in how Trump managed his cabinet with how Stewart managed the Oath Keepers board of directors, and seeing like the similarities was the beginning of being able to see through it. And because of my direct experience with Oath Keepers, I managed to avoid several very nasty right-wing fringe pipelines that I would have otherwise been perfectly keyed towards, like soft versions of white nationalism that appeal to people who really think they're not racist. And
can you give an example? That sounds interesting.
Like there's the continuum in there's the image of popular America that's apple pie and 4th of July barbecue and playing baseball on the field and the Stars and Stripes waving over the courthouse, and maybe sometimes the Stars and Bars waving over the courthouse if you live in the right part of the country. And just by default, that image is 99% white. And that's what's held by, like, that's the John Birch Society view of America, is incidentally 1950s white suburbia. And then you move further, and there's a like being an American exceptionalist, which has roots in being a Western civilization exceptionalist, which leads into believing that the European culture is a superior model because it shared space with the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and gave birth to humanism and Western liberal democracy and all of that. And that leads into a bit of more Eurocentrism and just being proud of your cultural roots as a white person, because it was your culture and ancestry that created all this greatness that you're so proud of, going all the way back to the baseball game. That leads into
That's amazing. That's great.
Genetic pride in being like a Celtic, Norse, or Northern European or Southern European. If you're Alpine Aryan white person, it was like, I'm just proud of my ancestors, and I don't have to, like the Nazi club that existed in the local high school in Eureka. We weren't racist. We were just proud of being white and proud of being white people and proud of everything our ancestors accomplished. And that's where you get taking pride in your ancestors for being victorious over the Native Americans, because we were just better. And that leads into
civilizing
white separatism.
The savages.
Yep, or just removing them, or we were just superior warriors, so we won. Might makes right. It's the warrior ethic. And then that leads into white supremacy with a little asterisk to show that there's a footnote beneath, which is white supremacy with an addendum, which is white separatism, Christian identity, white nationalism, which is everyone else isn't strictly inferior, but really they are. We'll just say that later. It's that we're just the chosen people of God, or every race is beautiful and unique. So why should we support all of that beauty and uniqueness being watered down into a single monotone? What's wrong with preserving the genetic diversity of the human race? Why shouldn't that be protected? And then into, why is it that only white people are called out for opposing race mixing? Why isn't everyone yelling at Japan to let a bunch of refugees in, which leads into genetic bloodline supremacist white supremacy and Nazism? And you have a spectrum where the political goals of the people all the way over here who think that they're the real anti-racists overwhelmingly, because that's what they're being told, can be used as cover to support the goals of the people way the heck over here at the magical Nazi occultist society point of the spectrum, where these people think that they're these guys' enemies, and these guys see these people as a recruiting pool and operational cover. And Oathkeepers started out way the heck over here in John Birch land, maybe a bit into Western civilization, exceptionalist, and by allowing themselves to become associated with friends of white nationalists over time, driven by Stuart's personal fear of going to prison and grasping for any lifeboat that he can, they've shifted this way into the welcoming arms of Patriot Front and the Proud Boys.
That's absolutely amazing how you describe that. That is astonishing. Because it's
and many
so
Republicans, like right-wing people, don't understand that this, like a lot of Democrats see the continuum for what it is, but Republicans, mainstream Republicans, people that I know, are nonstop hammered through their social media feeds with propaganda specifically decrying that this exists and saying that it doesn't exist, and characterizing the left as calling them all Nazis, when what most people on the left are really saying and being really bad about the messaging is you guys are friends of friends of friends of friends of Nazis, and these Nazis are all donating to and having secret meetings with the politicians you vote for. And it's not getting across because busy people with busy lives who have families and work a lot only overwhelmingly absorb their political news almost entirely through social media, which has been captured by propagandists. And so they really think they're the real anti-racist, and they think that being accused of being a Nazi is a huge slur when they're being given a snippet soundbite of someone else telling them the truth. This is something I've experienced over and over again personally, is it's very hard to break that. And then you also have a lot of people that are actually racist and just in denial over it, who think they're over here and are in fact like middle to three quarters this way.
Yeah.
And just don't want to admit it.
Oh, sure.
Add more noise to that.
So I need to just have a 5-second break here. I need to go and get some more wine. But this is absolutely fantastic. One thing I'd like you to do, though, for the audience, is to explain Jade Helm just quickly. I know all about it. I'm going to grab a wine while you do that. But
Thank you. I'm a little bit too close to the subject here, so I often forget to expand on things. Operation Jade Helm was that 2015 or 2017? Something happened in 2015 and something happened in 2017, and honestly, I can't remember right now. But it was I think 2015, I think. It was a military operation that was a joint branch operation with multiple components of the United States military, mostly focused on special operations, lots of Army Special Forces, Navy SEALs, airborne and ranger elements, and I believe air assault specifically was involved at one point for a practice for taking an airfield. And then they had National Guard in camouflage and pickup trucks play acting as insurgents, and it was a war game and training exercise for a widespread counterinsurgency operation to go in and secure contested insurgent held and secure territories and practice snatching up key enemy leadership with stealth Blackhawks out of very dense urban areas, and practice moving into rural communities to root out insurgent cells. And a lot of people think that might have been a dry run for a counterinsurgency operation after an intervention in Venezuela, which was a very hot topic at the time, or possibly for operations in Mexico against the cartel. The militia movement overwhelmingly thought this was a training run for coming to get them, which it might well have been. I'm probably never going to be privy to those details in my life. Might have been just multi-purpose, but the conspiracy theory was that it was at the very last second, that this was training for an immediate operation. And at the very last second, they were going to switch over to being a live operation and launch a massive decapitation strike against every right-wing paramilitary group in the United States, accuse them of some kind of fake attack, because any attack against civilian targets or the government carried out by any right-wing group is automatically considered to be a false flag run by the CIA. Nothing is real. That's a huge central part of the propaganda. And then that was going to be the start of the Civil War, with a devastating first blow by the United States government. And everyone was losing their minds over it. Oath Keepers was losing their minds over it. And then nothing happened.
Well, and do you recall who was the highest placed politician who got involved and upset about it?
That would be Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, who mobilized the Texas State Guard to monitor all of the United States military forces involved in this training exercise, and had the Texas State Militia like shadowing them while they were going about their training exercise, and made a huge amount of noise over it when he knew very well that this was a training exercise. It was all to play to his base.
And so did the Guard, the Texas Guard, by the way. Yeah, no, it's stunning, because it's exactly the kind of problem set we've been talking about, right? There is absolutely, I used to be a fairly senior official in the US Special Operations Command. This was all of the theories of what it was going to be from the way it was perceived on the other side. So ludicrous, but it shocked us at the command that that Abbott took this position. It's like, what the hell is going on here?
And that reveals that it's such a hot button topic that he's doing that as a legitimate tactic to appeal to his voter base, which reveals a serious, serious problem, as there's a huge part of the country that thinks that you are going to come kick their doors in the middle of the night and kill them all, and you're waiting for an opportunity.
And that was so, I mean, just, that was the whole concept of all of that for the people, for us, Special Operations Command setting up totally, this is not the first time. This was they've done this game I don't know how many times before in the past. This is just routine ops, right? And that there was all this thinking on the other side. We were really quite shocked by all of that, because we were not tuned into any of that kind of insane thinking. But I remember just the surprise of what. You know, it's just that was the same reaction I had to Pizzagate. It was just, and this is one of the things where I want to take this actually with talking to you about all of this, is it was just so insane that it had no connection to any reality. And I'm talking about from a personal perspective, right? I mean, I was living the sort of the perfect American middle class dream. I wasn't anywhere near any of this stuff. I hadn't heard about any of it. Then Pizzagate happens, and it just how could somebody think this? And the connection to what got me involved in that's what started me on the road to this book. It was essentially, how could somebody think such a thing that was so obviously, stupid? And now we've got, I mean, really, there wasn't even a basement. I mean, the whole thing was so ridiculous. And yet now we see all kinds of theories that are out there right now that are believed by serious segments of the population that are as ridiculous, but are as passionately believed as the guy who took the gun there. And the sort of the classic case, there's sort of like two sides to it. You've got there's one person or there's a group of people who are on their deathbed. They haven't, taken the shot from COVID. And at the final moment, they say, I was an idiot, I did the wrong thing, and then they die. Please get the shot, they die. But then you have the other group who are still headstrong as they're dying, saying, no way, don't come near me. And their families are supporting them and saying, as their loved one dies of COVID before them, we are not going to get the shot.
Yeah, he's not actually dying of COVID. It's not COVID exactly. Because COVID is fake. We know this because we've been told. And that's where like some of that has occurred before. This is it's because QAnon's strength is exploiting pre-existing weaknesses in our culture simultaneously, like a growing invasive vine, where there was the guy who brought like 6 guns to him and swam to Bohemian Grove and tried to storm Bohemian Grove to rescue the child captives in, I think, the 90s. But then he was radicalized just by early internet newsletters and like talk radio. And
you might want to explain in a very paragraph or two what Bohemian Grove is for the listeners.
Oh, that's a regular meeting on a particular island where, and I can't remember if the Bohemian Grove is actually a name for the island or just a pop culture name.
No, I think it's the name of it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and it's a popular destination for the wealthy and powerful and connected to meet, especially politicians. And they do like a frat boy ritual where they burn an effigy to bring in, I guess, their in-group version of the new year. Mostly they just pee on the signs that say "Don't piss off the trail," and have a bunch of prostitutes in by the busload and then dress up in drag and do a stage show. And there's it's a very popular destination for alumni of the Skull and Bones Club at Yale, where George W. Bush was famously a member. And it's because of all the owl decorations and the ritualism and the number of like industry leaders in technology and the wealthy and powerful and connected that go there for this big drunken cross-dressing revel in the woods with their busloads of hookers. It's been a long time fixation of
Alex Jones
conspiracy theorists. Alex Jones in particular. Well, Alex Jones got famous because he and Ron Johnson, the investigative reporter, snuck into Bohemian Grove under assumed names and got video of the effigy burning ritual and all the owl statues and did a live report of it. And of course, Alex Jones ran wild with hyperbole, just like he did with the hermaphroditic frogs from water pollution thing, where he turned a factual thing like frogs are being born as non-functioning hermaphrodites because of water table pollution, and went to the New World Order as putting chemicals in the water to make us all gay for population control.
Right.
And he went from, there's this weird social club of the top 1% in this country and the politically powerful and elite, and went to, they are sacrificing children to the pagan god Moloch as mentioned in the Bible. And that was the launch point of his career, and he's been doing the exact same thing ever since.
I didn't know anything about the Alex Jones connection. That's outrageous. That's
there's back before the Joe Rogan podcast was a transmission vehicle for propaganda, he actually had Ron Johnson on the talk about it. And Alex Jones extensively practiced his preppy walk in a clothing store to try to present the body language of what he thought of as a guy who would work for Google so that he could slip in undetected. And they just walked in with the crowd and got into the front door. The original plan was to try to get there using an inflatable raft under cover of darkness. And it was Ron Johnson's idea to just
walk
act like they belonged and breeze past security, which is exactly what they did with like hidden cameras. But
so in this world where completely ridiculous fantasy is taken as almost gospel truth,
take it absolutely seriously, and you are better than everyone else for recognizing it.
And so that's a really important point, actually. And
that means you've broken through the psychic programming, right?
So how does that not lead to violence?
That's the thing, is American culture is completely primed for that. So you've got priming for showing up at a supposed meeting place of the elite to shoot the place up. The precursor to that early on happened through conspiracy theory talk radio and early internet message boards. You've got people refusing vital treatment on their deathbed because of their beliefs. You've got that already happening with the Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusions. You have this matrix of belief that if you seriously believed in it, you would have no choice but to kill a bunch of people, where you have people who, like this, the hardcore pro-life, anti-choice Christians, who, if they all really seriously believed that each abortion was the murder of a child, as fully as if you went up to the crib and just stabbed a knife down, they would all shoot up an abortion clinic, and there'd be non-stop street warfare like out of the Troubles in North Ireland. But some people do take it that seriously, instead of just weaving it into their cultural identity and repeating violent rhetoric to be part of an in-group, like a lot of these people do. And so the insidious thing about QAnon is it wrapped all that up in itself, and signal boosts so that everyone has a pet ideology that is a component now of QAnon once it's all fully packaged for them. And then the echo chamber is so huge, it looks like they are the majority of the country to them, and they're being told that. And it creates a larger and larger pool of people who will potentially take it 1000% seriously and immediately jump to violence. It creates a larger crowd to cheer those people on, and it creates more intensity in that ratcheting up of belief, because the echo chamber that reinforces their beliefs is fractal. It nests like Russian pop dolls, so you can get down to a very small group that they're all hyping each other up to immediately go commit a terrorist attack. And then you have the very large echo chamber that makes you feel like everyone in the country inherently believes in you. It's a perfect vehicle for getting people to commit acts of lone wolf violence directed at specific targets, while maintaining plausible deniability for the people that are manipulating it.
Shit. Yeah. That's has that been happening already? Do you think that I mean,
well, it's the recent shooting in Colorado, I think he wasn't specifically a QAnon guy, but he was definitely wrapped up in the right-wing fringe and in like the racist segment of Norse neo-paganism,
sure,
which is a huge lead into white supremacy. Like, good luck finding a bunch of Viking enthusiasts to go do rituals in the woods with that are not Nazis. I wish you all the best. And there was the spree shooter at the massage parlor. Spree shooter was an outgrowth of the incel movement, which is increasingly being wrapped up in QAnon.
right?
And then you have the Vanguard America / Patriot Front guy who rammed his car through a crowd of protesters.
Right.
So it is increasing, and I think we're going to see, probably it's going to be the election officials who refuse to leave their posts when the next election is inevitably contested that are going to be the targets of actual violence, because so it's very easy to get people to commit to a campaign of harassment. And that is the lead-in. So I think as we go into 2022, we're going to see specific QAnon violence start to occur.
Well, and that's the other thing too, and we've got this normalization of electoral violence, so that when the next one comes, regardless of whether it's been held completely legitimately or not, both sides are going to be saying it's contested, and the public's belief in the possibility of a free and fair election is dead now. So whether it is free or fair or not, the belief in it is gone, which then enables the radicalization against whatever the electoral outcome is going to be.
And they've got long-standing criticisms and conspiracy theories on the left about ENS voting machines, and its partial ownership by Dick Cheney is fueling a lot of conspiracy theories that mostly hinge on this current fad in Trump's people committing just pure projection. So there is absolutely faith in the electoral system is being completely undermined on both sides. I am going to have to say that I made a mistake here. I'm running right up against the time slot where my mother is supposed to go on to a live interview with CNN, and this is the podcast This is the quiet place where we can do stuff like this interrupted. So she's
No
got
worries.
to go on and do her live test in like 3 minutes.
Okay.
And I
Well, you know what?
thing again.
No,
Didn't
it's
even
all
get to the
good.
point where we talked about Oath Keepers.
Don't worry.
But
Let's
you know-
pick this
but
up
you know
another
what?
time.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think we'll do like part 1, part 2. We'll call this one part 1. And yeah, that was fantastic, guys. Really appreciate you both coming together for this conversation, and we're going to do it again. For anybody who is watching, subscribe, comment, share, all that good stuff. And we'll see you next time.